today talking to Bree Said. Um, that's her pseudonym, and this is the first time that we've talked again. And you want to just tell us a little bit about yourself again? Just whatever you feel comfortable saying. No pressure. If I ever ask you a question that you don't feel comfortable, I don't mean to be asking you tough questions if I ever do. So just ignore them. I want to just reiterate that to people, that there's no pressure at all to say anything that you don't want to say. But go ahead and just give us a little bit about yourself, whatever you feel comfortable saying.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Bree Said. I am a military veteran, served with the Air Force for 7 years. I'm also a military brat, so I grew up all over the world, having to transition very quickly to new situations. And I come from, I'm also Native American, and I think that, while that might be a little bit more personal information, I think it's really relevant because one thing that I've been studying and learning about is historic trauma that happens within minority communities. And so it's been interesting going back and looking at, the way that I grew up through that lens of historic trauma.
Yes. So, historic trauma, do you mean kind of like the societal kind of changes, or what do we call this, DNA,
Mm-hmm.
the DNA that is not your DNA, but is like inherited from and can be changed with societal trauma? Do you know which one I'm
Yeah.
talking about?
Yes, and that's pretty much what happened within, Native American communities, especially whenever, your populations are the result of genocide, rape, abuse, all that stuff. And when people, when they go through trauma like that and they don't ever, do the work to fix it, those kind of traumas end up becoming a cycle, not just, within families, but also genetically too, because that trauma does change your DNA. And so whenever I was doing my research,
Oh, you cut out a little bit.
my data in Prometheus to kind of see like what, oh, sorry, I was saying I uploaded my data into this site called Prometheus. And just to kind of dig a little bit deeper to see like what other things, might pop. And sure enough, my genetic profile is heavily riddled with things like borderline, schizophrenia, and that doesn't mean that I have it. It just means that I am a genetic carrier for things like that.
So I have no idea, had no idea this thing Prometheus even worked. I think, by the way, it might be my connection. I don't know why. This is the same connection I always use. Was a little bit compromised, but epigenetic is the word that I was thinking of and the word that I was looking up. But like Prometheus, it allows you to upload, you like swab your mouth or something, and then you have a bunch of DNA that you send to these people, and they say you have a predisposition to these various types uh, of issues, disorders. That's what's going on.
Not necessarily a predisposition. What they're saying is that, through your genetic information, you have certain genetic markers that are like turned on or
Hmm.
off. And what they've done is that they've taken the genome sequencing that they've been able to find and all the different variants where they're kind of like, okay, the data is showing that this specific genetic marker could lead to things like this.
Hmm.
So you could have a predisposition to it. It's the same thing with like my body, just because of my minority background, my body doesn't metabolize carbohydrates, right? That doesn't mean that like, I can't metabolize carbohydrates, and it doesn't mean that, I could be affected by it, but it means that I have a higher chance.
Yes, yes. So I get it. So it's I think it's called the BRCA gene, for breast cancer or something. Angelina Jolie famously got a double mastectomy because she had the gene. So kind of just things like that. Or there's the warrior gene. The warrior gene was
Yeah.
kind of a popular one. So this Prometheus though just has like, 30 of these genes or something, like a bunch
Oh,
more than.
way more than that. It's got so much, like they've compiled so much data there to compare against like your genetic stuff, and it's got just a lot of information. I highly recommend checking it out.
Hmm. Okay. That's very cool. So you have all these kind of genetic markers for these things, and you kind of conclude. But I definitely think epigenetics probably has a role in this, but I also think, imagine in these types of situations, who is surviving. I just watched a Black Mirror episode. I've been watching the Black Mirrors of, I think, season 4 or 5. If you like see my Twitters, you'll see me like interacting with this one dude who I don't like his review of this particular Black Mirror. Maybe we'll get back to it. But I just watched the one, I think it's called Metalhead, and it's like post-apocalyptic, and spoiler alert, like people, yeah, just commit suicide because they're like, no, thank you for like dealing with this. So I
Huh.
sometimes think that too, like you have these terrible traumatic kind of incidents, and in some ways, like ask yourself why personality disorders developed. I think it was largely as like a, defense mechanism against
Oh, yeah.
some of the horrors of society.
Yeah, because if you think about it, like at the center of most personality disorders is the ego,
Mhm.
right? And so if it's preservation of the ego. And so whenever you're going through these traumatic things, the one thing that helps people survive is that protection of the ego.
Yes.
Um, with things like narcissism, when that ego gets activated, it really, especially with narcissism, it really changes their worldview, which is why we see narcissists, play from the same playbook. I mean, almost to a T. And, I don't like the word narcissist to be like used to describe, just somebody who's selfish and things like that, because true narcissism is a completely different brain wiring and perspective of the world that they just can't see past their ego.
Right.
And
Yeah.
so
My dad's
it,
probably diagnosable. So I experience that all the time. And sometimes I speak nicely of him, and I think people are like, how? And I'm just like, well, that his childhood is worse than mine. That's like just a quick and dirty way to say it.
but it is what it is, like whenever it comes to people who suffer from NPD, like there's no changing them. And, you just kind of have to accept it. Like my ex-husband is a narcissist. I'm actually like, for some reason, it seems like all the people that I've been attracted to have been high in narcissistic traits and stuff, because it's that charisma. I
Uh-huh.
love that they have that energy level.
It's
But
funny because there's this guy that I speak with too, who is, and he's very self-aware about it. He's like, yeah, there's just actually two people I'm thinking of now that I'm talking about it. They're very attracted to sociopathic women. And it's kind of like, they're like, once you see the world that way, and once you're in a relationship with that level of kind of excitement and engagement, that it's just really hard to go back to something that's not that.
yes, and that's kind of like where, and it's for me, I know what it is that I'm attracted to, and I know, like, for me, my own, and that's the thing, I've never been diagnosed. I just have my own theory that I'm most likely afflicted with, psychopathy, just based on, how I've lived my life, the patterns and the data that I've been able to compile, and just, going back and looking at who I am as an adult today, while it is, largely different, my traits haven't really changed. I've just learned to better control them and to work, more cohesively within the tribe.
Right.
So it's really interesting to go back though and look at, how my behavior was when I was a kid, and how that consistency has always been there.
So real quick question, is your tribe big, medium, or small? Because I guess if it was really big, maybe there could be a little bit more, there's some tribes that they're so big that it's like, okay, yes, it's just like, it seems like less small towny about things, right? Does that seem right?
Um, kind of. It depends. Like my tribe is actually extremely small.
Uh-huh.
It's one of the smaller tribes, and we don't have any full bloods left. But I can tell you that, historically speaking, my tribe was one of the meanest tribes, in the United States,
Mhm.
and we have a reputation, for being very vicious,
Yeah.
even
Okay.
today.
So I'm thinking of a few in my mind that I would guess, but yeah, I won't say them, but yes, that's interesting. And, just to kind of give like a little bit of background to like the viewer, so I have read, what some things that Bree said has said about her childhood, and I thought they were strikingly similar to my girlfriend Aria, who is also very psychopathic. Just kind of, and funny too, because Aria is like a little bit of a different generation. She's quite a bit younger than me. And so they're just, it's interesting to see, you know, like I did not grow up like early childhood with the internet, and to see like what what psychopathy would look like in a small little baby girl psychopath, like as the internet's just like burgeoning, you know, like you can imagine the shenanigans and chat rooms and just like, you know, the ability to kind of be anybody on the internet, and how that would appeal to a small psychopathic child was pretty
Oh,
entertaining.
I miss it, you know, because like one of the things that I look back on now, like I just who I am inherently. I've got this big personality, you know, I'm very successful. I try to leave behind a reputation of, you want to get it done, you know, call Bree.
Hmm.
And um and because of that, it's opened up a lot of doors for opportunity to continue like rising in a way, socially, also work wise and professionally. And so I've been able to accomplish a lot because of that tenacity and that drive and that high energy that I have. But I go back and I look at like whenever I was, you know, 14 and playing MMORPGs online, and I loved my freedom. And
Mm.
there was this game that we used to play where you would, if you killed another player, you would get a red name. And what that meant is that if somebody else came back and killed you, you would, you know, potentially drop an important armor item or something.
Mm.
So it wasn't always a good idea to have a red name, but I would run around and rack up 200 hours of red name. And so the entire server hated me. They were just like, you know, oh, she's out there killing everybody again. And I was like, yeah. So then I had to go back and start working on a little bit of damage control, because I was like, all right, everyone on the server's pissed off at me now. How can I protect myself and, you know, preserve my reputation, you know, whatever. So what I ended up doing is I manipulated the situation and started doing guild reviews, so
Mm.
that like all the guilds on the server wanted me in their guilds, that I do a review of them, but it also gave me protection because they were obligated to protect me if I got attacked. And
Mm.
then I got my own guild, you know, so that it was a player killing guild, PvP. And but whenever I started that guild, like it was more like everyone joined it to follow me, but I didn't really want to be a leader. I just wanted my freedom, and being the guild master did not grant me that freedom. So I made my best friend the guild leader, and then I would go hop out of the guild and just go on a killing rampage. And so, you know, that was 14, and
Mm.
I you know, manipulating these situations and creating these PR, you know, schemes and everything. You know, now that I'm older and stuff, and I've gotten myself into many situations where I've had to do virtually the same thing. You know, once I became more self-aware at about, you know, 29, I was like, you know, just seeing all that play together and like how it's still consistently something that I do. I was like, man, you know, it's wild.
I think it's really interesting that you had those experiences, and I'm kind of happy for you that you were able to, in this virtual world, to kind of play out like what would it be like to be just completely antisocial, you know, like you know, obviously killing other players is something that would be considered antisocial, and you get a reputation for yourself, and then you try to rehabilitate that reputation. It's interesting that like this all, you know, this kind of, I mean, I did not have virtual worlds to do that in. I had to do it in my regular life, and it was pretty rocky, you know, honestly, because of it, because it's like, okay, now no friends again, here we go, let's try again. I mean, luckily just kind of naturally, because child, you're changing schools, you know, like you go to a middle school, then you go to a high school, then you go to a college, so that helped. Then to law school for me, and by law school, I think I had like kind of figured it out in terms of not burning bridges, but not really, you know, it kind of kept going. And I think that was what was surprising to me, is that I kept having problems in that area. Even when I was trying to be good, I kept having problems. So have you
Yeah.
kind of noticed that at all in your own life?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you know, it's becoming less and less now that I'm kind of, you know, now that I have become self-aware. Because when I hit about 29 is whenever I started going through a divorce. And between the ages of like, and here's the thing. So you've had access to like read my early childhood, my teen years, like I am scared to get to that portion of my writing because it was so chaotic. Absolutely, just I feel bad for my parents and the shit that I put them through, you know. And so we'll skip the teen years and just kind of go to like a little bit later adolescence. When I was about 19, I ran away to Tokyo and became an escort.
Well, at what
And
age?
at 19,
Okay.
yeah, so I ran off to Tokyo to become an escort while simultaneously being in the military. And so that was a really unique portion of my life. But like for me, I look back at it now and I'm like, yeah, to an average person, that is extremely like risk-taking behavior. You know, me, I felt like I had so many like backup plans and like, you know, enough protection for myself that like I didn't see a problem with doing what I was doing.
Yeah.
And so from like there to about 29, I was go, 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 do, you know, get the hell out of my way, you know, not really like reflecting on anything, just like full power, full steam ahead, you know, career, house, family, white picket fence, you know, empire. I was empire building.
Yeah.
And then the 29 hits and stuff, and my ex and I, you know, just hit a certain, and again, he's a narcissist. So like my and I've got a very high threshold and tolerance for certain behaviors because I can understand it and I can reason it, you know, but at a certain point, it just got too much. And I finally like had enough and kicked him out. Then that's when all hell broke loose. And, you know, he was, and we do have children together. So like he up and like just completely dipped on them, which in turn pissed me off. And here I was the breadwinner and had provided him with, you know, the life and the luxuries that he had. And so at one point I went back, I found out where he was staying, which was with this girl, and we had just split. So like this was like a huge like violation of my moral ethics and whatever the hell. And so I was sleeping around with this girl, and I the way that I found out too was, you know, I'm very versed in IT. So I ended up hacking into his phone, found the Google, you know, location history, found the car because it's my car, popped the tire on it, went home, woke up the next day. I was like, all right, what am I gonna do about this car? Go back, have a tow truck come get it, you know. And they were like, is this your car? And I was like, yes. And they were like, do you have a key? And I was like, nope. And they're like, are you fighting with your husband? Yes, sir, I am. And they were like, it's title. And I'm like, I think the title's in the car. So the guy popped the car, we got the title and it had my name on it. And so he towed it back for me, you know. And it was just like these little war games that we were playing against each other and just kept escalating. And you know, because for me, I felt like I was justified in what I was doing.
Yeah.
And just, and again, like it just kept escalating. And then finally, you know, when he filed for divorce, I knew that was like my legal stop. Like you can't continue these little war games. Like now, you know, legality is involved and it can get you in a lot more trouble. So like I had to back off. But then after all that, I ended up going on like a really long road of self-reflection, looking both into my behavior, his behavior, seeing what patterns were, like why these cycles were happening. And a lot of it do with the fact that, yeah, I am tolerant and I have a high threshold of abuse that I can take. And so that was one part of the cycle. The other part of the cycles that I'd gone through was, you know, being reactionary and allowing things that were out of my control to trigger me. And so it was just a long journey of figuring out how to not be as reactionary, because that's what was getting me in trouble.
Right. Yeah. So a couple things, you know, I'm not even the one that came up with this, but another psychopath called this experience you said until like 29, the playground stage. Very low on self-reflection is probably the best way to describe it. And you kind of seem like Teflon, like nothing really seems to stick in terms of consequences, bad consequences. Then playground stage is awesome. Like if anybody, a normal person, could experience the playground stage of being a psychopath, it is truly like the world is your oyster. Every day is great, you know, but there are moments during it when it sucks, you know, but it overall feels like, no, it's all worth it or whatever. It's like a genie has given you 3 wishes or something. That's what it feels like. And you burn through those wishes, and then it's you kind of go through a psychological bankruptcy. next, which I call the reckoning, or like a come to Jesus phase. Like suddenly all these kind of consequences that you have not been experiencing come to you pretty quickly, like kind of a wave of consequences. And so, yes, that
But
seems to be pretty common.
that's the side of it though, is that the consequences are what's fun, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Like, for me, one of the things that I love is, when I get myself into a sticky situation, facing the consequences, I find very, fun, because there's a thrill in being able to navigate out of the situation, being able to exercise, your brain and your traits and your skill set to maneuver, difficult situations.
Yes.
And so that's where I had to, especially with that whole reckoning phase that you're talking about, I had to go back and look at like what was causing all the issues. And I found, as like you peel back the layers of that onion, at the root of my layers was, the fear of rejection. And so because of that fear of rejection, I was unable to communicate with my husband. Because of that fear of rejection, I was allowing, and that's where all my insecurities were popping up, and being able to conquer and master, fear of rejection allowed me to have the freedom that I needed in order to continue to grow. And so, that was probably one of my biggest vulnerabilities, and now it's non-existent.
Yeah. So it's interesting. People listening to you are probably like, this is crazy. But it is a little bit, that I know somebody else, a psychopathic guy from Europe, who makes himself problems intentionally so he can solve them. In fact, we spent some time together, and he'd be like, we're going to intentionally just roll into this city and like not have any place to sleep, because then that creates for us the problem of having we need to find a place to sleep. And then that's fun to solve. And I was like, okay, So,
I mean, I like to, yeah, like very, very similar behavior on this end over here too.
yeah.
And yeah, but I think what's also interesting is that like while I've gone on my journey of like self-reflection, I've also somehow ended up as like a mentor to a lot of people who are going through difficult times in their life as well. And I end up with these like 4-hour long therapy sessions at my house where, people within my community or my tribe come over and we just talk about things. And it's really interesting because through like our discussions and stuff, I've been able to also identify other interesting things. Like, for example, when I was growing up, I thought I had empathy. I thought that I had, shame and guilt and remorse. But what I found is that, and this was kind of like one of those like, holy shit moments. I watched a friend of mine have a complete breakdown because her parents found out that she had an OnlyFans. And I was like, why?
What?
She had an OnlyFans.
Oh, okay. Uh-huh.
And her parents found out about it, and they're very controlling over her. And she is, a highly sensitive person. And so she had a full-on panic attack, in the bathroom. And watching that manifest on her, I realized, oh, this is what shame looks like.
Mm-hmm.
This is actually what it looks like. What I've been experiencing my entire life is not shame, it's not remorse, it's not guilt. I just go straight to anger.
Mm.
And it was like, wow. So other people have the ability to feel these more complex feelings, and I don't have that. Yeah. And another one that I learned about was trust. I don't know what trust feels like. It's more like I think the emotions versus actually feeling them.
Yeah, it makes complete sense. I also did, I forget when was, if you read my book, then it's like when I was friends with Anne is when I finally learned how to trust or something. So that would have been like in my mid-20s or something. I felt like I was like learning how to, I don't know, like Taekwondo or something. Every day was like a new keep practicing type crap,
Well, it's just so weird because it's like I don't have the same emotional range that other people do. And it's like, when you're a kid and you don't realize that you don't have those feelings, you just think that, oh, I'm angry, therefore I must feel shame, and it's just been mind blowing to kind of be awake to that. And what else was it? So like with trust, there, like I rely heavily on data and patterns when it comes to how I feel about things, because again, it is something that like I think, you know, I go into a situation, I see certain signs that show me, oh, I can trust this person, you know, and I'm going to, but it's not like a feeling per se. So it's just weird.
So, do you want to hear a little bit about my theory about why you rely on data and patterns?
Go for it.
Yeah, okay. So it's again entirely consistent, but this is, this is just my working theory. You can take it for what it is, but I think what I've noticed in normal people is that they make decisions from a place of like identity more frequently than we do, which for us is probably like 1% is like, and usually only in anger and maybe not even then reflective completely of our kind of like identity. So let me I've used this example before. I think you probably haven't heard it, apologies for people who have heard it before, but a normal person, if given a particular situation, the choice is to lie or not to lie, right? A normal person might say something like, hey, I'm an honest person, so I'm going to lie. Or like, I'm a gaming you type of person, I'm a player or whatever, so I'm going to lie. But they're kind of coming from a place of identity frequently. And a psychopath, because it's a personality disorder, we've talked about like the differences between the ego-ish of a narcissist is like, they have a fake ego that they present to the world, and then they have an internal ego that is like centered around shame. Fake ego is perfect, internal ego is insecurity and like I suck, right? The ego-ish that psychopaths seem to have is just a very weak sense of self. So no false sense of self, no kind of like chameleon, like the borderline personality disorder, but just a very weak connection to a sense of self that normal people would have. So a psychopath would not say, for instance, I'm an honest person, therefore I will tell the truth, because they don't really have a conception of themselves as being either an honest person or a dishonest person. They haven't like self-reflected or like kind of created that identity for themselves at any point in their life. It's mostly just missing, right? There may be a few exceptions, like maybe I could identify as being a musician or something that you spent a sufficient time and energy towards, that you have come to, for whatever reason, identify with, right? So people then are making most choices, I would say, from a place of self-expression. Sometimes we make fun of them, like, what am I going to eat today? Well, I'm vegan. That is my identity. So this is going to make this choice for me. So in the absence of making choices based on self-expression and a place of identity, what do psychopaths end up doing? They end up, instead of being process oriented, which would be choosing based from coming from a place of identity, like I'm honest, so I'll choose the process of honesty. They instead are outcome oriented, which is, makes sense. They have no process with which to operate on, like, what would you say? Be yourself. They don't know who they are. They don't know what that means to be themselves in most situations, right? They don't have a conception of their identity that is that robust, that they'd be able to actually know enough to be themselves in a situation. So instead they focus on outcomes. When you're outcome oriented, you're very focused on predicting outcomes. And as you say, kind of taking in all the information, processing it, and thinking to yourself something like, should I tell the truth or should I tell a lie? Well, what are all the ramifications of me telling a truth? Including, and you mentioned you're a chess player to me in text, including, like knowing 10 moves ahead of time, 20 moves, even better. What's going to happen, 10 years down the line if I tell a truth in this moment versus tell a lie in this moment, same thing. What's going to happen 10 moves ahead of time? And then, I think the psychopaths that are high functioning are the ones that are able to kind of, generally speaking, this is a generalization, are the ones who are able to think more moves ahead of time, more moves out, like, 20, 25, that would be even higher functioning than the ones that can just do 20, that can just do 5, right? So when your outcome, go ahead.
Yeah. No, I was gonna say, I think that is actually spot on. And
Yes.
well, and here's another thing too, is like, I wouldn't say that I'm high functioning, but I would say that the ability to become self-aware and to recognize everything, like to bring what has been subconscious my entire life to the conscious, that has probably been the most eye-opening thing. And it's also helped me because like it's crazy to go back and look and see how much I was doing subconsciously that was always saving my ass. Just like my processing, portion of my brain to be able to think, 20 moves ahead in the subconscious and then make quick decisions. I've been very fortunate for that ability, but like now having it like in the awareness portion of my brain, like it's phenomenal. But also you talk about like how they don't have that sense of identity. I kind of struggled with that too. And I had to sit down for 6 months and like go over what is it that I actually value, and it was identifying what it was that I valued that helped me to have an identity, to actually be authentic to who I am. And through my authenticity, I'm able to exist in the world pretty freely with who I am. But I also have like, strong boundaries on my traits, and I use my narcissism to kind of help enforce that too.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it sounds like you're doing great. It's interesting you say, like, I remember when I was little, you just had this recent, like in the past 5-10 years moment of like shifting all subconscious kind of planning. And, the word I use often is orchestration. The way that you're kind of orchestrating your world all the time, you shifted more of that to your conscious mind. I remember like, I must've been like 6, 7, 8 or something. I made that shift that early. And I don't know if it does help because, you can be that much more aware. But I have to say that the issue kind of like the problem with the orchestrating, and I think maybe I have like mentioned this briefly to you, but for the sake of people that have not been on our emails or texts, the problem with orchestrating ultimately just kind of flagging for you like a potential like a detour or like road construction is that your brain degrades year to year. My brain is like, I don't know, 60% of what it used to be. I used to be very smart. Like now, if I took the LSAT, which is the test you have to take to get into law school, I probably wouldn't have scored in the 99th percentile, or I would have had to study more or whatever, because my brain used to be so great, and it was so great at predicting things. It was so great at figuring things out. It was so great at reading people. And now it's like, I mean, I sleep 10 hours a night and it just feels like my brain, if I'm like heavy thinking, it gets burned out by like the early to mid afternoon. Like I really probably only have like 2 to 3 good hours a day of good thinking. And then it just turns the crap thinking, right? So the things that I was able to do when I was young in my early 20s, mid 20s, I am no longer able to do. I can no longer orchestrate or predict. And then the amount that I am taxing my mind with the orchestrating and predicting of like relatively like neutral, not important topics, like a very like, where should I go to lunch today, is taxing my brain, or was taxing my brain to the degree that I was like, this is not sustainable. Like I have to figure out a better way of at least starting to make choices that aren't exclusively outcome oriented, right? I need to figure out how to become more process oriented. And the benefit too of being process oriented is this very stoic way of being. And in fact, the kind of the solution from being outcome oriented is stoicism for the most part, or stoicism is like, stoicism and its philosophically fraternal siblings, is to be process oriented and to realize, hey, I can only do what I can do and can only control what I can control. And then whatever the outcome is, I have to just leave it up to, the universe.
Yes. And I would say that is very accurate. I've especially noticed within myself that, on the journey that I've been on for the past couple of years, I have become a lot more stoic. And then also, I think you don't give yourself enough credit too, because, there are still parts of the subconscious that are working with you to help create more efficient processes. So like, while I'm over here collecting all this data to, have in my memory bank whenever I'm assessing situations. I've also developed more efficient ways of doing things so that I'm not having to exert as much mental energy.
Hmm.
And kind of why I started playing chess. And it's something that like literally my entire city is now playing because we started going to the bars and playing it and everyone got involved. And but that's kind of one of the reasons I started playing, because it helps keep, that mental mind, strategy exercise part of your brain going.
Yes.
And also it's like one of those things where how do I put it? So the way that my mind works is that I'm like rarely ever in the present. I'm always like thinking about future things, thinking about past things, pulling data from there, applying it to future situations. I'm always like somewhere else in the matrix versus being here and now.
Right.
And that's something else that I discovered. So chess is also one of those ways that it forces me to be in the present.
Yeah, that's awesome. Nice thing too about chess, I feel like immediately I'm thinking about like what chess is like to you. Is there something like that to me? And I think of music. I have like it's largely been my kind of my social interactions throughout life. I was a music major, and now I just kind of like fool around or whatever whenever I want to play. But there's something nice because it's especially when you're playing, against somebody or playing in an ensemble, like you have to react to them. So there's a lot of engagement, and it's a temporal situation. So it's not like like art. I always think of being, it's just one place in time or something. But like a game like this is like it stretches out in time, and so it's like 4D, which helps engage my mind. So I agree that there are things that are really nice, kind of like soothing for my mind, helps to engage the mind in a way that is not the mind eating itself. Now that I've
Yeah.
said that phrase, have you experienced your brain eating itself?
I don't think so. I don't think that I've gone through that yet, but
Hmm.
also I'm like weird and I really like to tax my brain while like I'm on something. So I'll either get high and play chess so that I have like, that working against me in a sense, or I get drunk or something, but like and I don't know why I always do this, but like I've taken the LSAT before.
Hmm.
And I don't like to study for things. I don't like to have, any preconception of what I'm getting into whenever I go into things that people consider difficult, because I'm like, I want to see what my baseline is. Like if I didn't study, like where do I fall on the spectrum of just, baseline performance?
Right.
Well, I kind of screwed myself whenever I went to take the LSAT, because um, I went out with my mother that night and she just fed me drinks.
Mm.
And I was in bed by maybe 11 or 12, woke up at 3, still drunk, and was like, maybe I should study. Didn't study, played on the internet until about 7 in the morning, went to go take the test. I was not awake. My brain was not functioning. That would probably be the one instance where my brain was eating itself.
Mm.
And I took that test, got stuck on the first question for 10 minutes and then just breezed through the rest of it. I ended up passing, you know, but it was still just one of those things where it was like, why do I do this to myself?
Hmm. Yeah, the brain eating itself is usually more like an ingrown toenail. Like it's the brain is functioning whatever process. I keep trying to think there's got to be like maybe it's probably engines. Engines need oil, otherwise they like rub against themselves. That's what I kind of mean. Like there's nothing kind of like like the brain, like these machines that need something inside, like a thresher. It needs there to be, whatever wheat or something coming through. And if there is nothing there, then the brain will still keep working, but then it will be like crushing itself. That's kind of what I mean is like,
That was the first question of the LSAT for me. My brain was just not, it could not function. Like I could read and I could absorb the information, but nothing was clicking,
uh-huh.
it was just compounding and compounding. And it was like just being stuck in a way. And it just was very painful.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, I don't know. Like if orchestrating is working for you, then I'm like, I guess keep orchestrating. But it is kind of, I think, to be aware of it, like I'll tell you a little bit more about like self-expression, because I think it will also help you have a greater sense of meaning. Do you experience boredom frequently, and like maybe a lack of sense of purpose or meaning ever?
Um, well, with kind of like what's going on with my personal situation, I feel kind of stuck, but
Mm,
I keep myself relatively busy and I keep myself involved in activities. I do have goals and aspirations to be um, bigger than who I am currently.
mm,
And well, I think one of the paths that I'm looking at going down is going to be more of a political front. But in order to get there, I have to make a lot of small maneuvers now so that whenever I get out of the limbo that I'm currently stuck in, I can make the bigger moves that I need to make.
right.
It's kind of like, I've got a pretty good identity of like, or a pretty good idea of my sense of self, and who I want to be in the world. It's just making sure that my more dominant traits don't come out and wreck that.
Yeah. So, so, uh, is this like okay to kind of say something that might be like a reflection on your identity and your personhood?
Oh, go for it. I'm always open to criticism. I'm always open to, um, really any type of conversation that could help grow. There's no such thing as bad information, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Completely
So,
irrelevant.
yeah, I mean, eventually you probably will become more careful with that. And that is also kind of something that's like kind of highlighting, but the conception that you have of yourself right now is probably uh still a little bit, maybe, my guess is a little bit outcome kind of oriented. Like if you're saying like your sense of identity, you may even be kind of like thinking like, oh, Emmy is wrong here, or like this bothers you a little bit more than you thought it was going to bother you. I'm not saying that maybe it is or not. I'm kind of saying if I were in your position, like back when I was like your age-ish, your stage in life, let's say, then there's comfort, I think. I don't know what to say. It's like I want to, maybe it's better to just kind of like back up a little bit and suggest to you to keep an eye out for things that are self-expression for you, right? And one way that I have learned to identify them, like self-expression, not just like, okay, this is the accomplishment of a goal or something that's kind of fun or whatever, but like my therapist said this to me, RIP, he passed away recently, that when you are engaged in something that, yes, it takes work, but you somehow still feel rejuvenated. You may be exhausted, but you're also like rejuvenated and so excited about it, that this is self-expression. And I think in a large way, orchestrating really is self-expression for us, so yes. So that there will be that, but to kind of understand too that maybe you cannot keep orchestrating at your level forever, and trying to shift some of the load off of orchestrating over to self-expression and being more process oriented about your choices, and the process that I would commend to you, kind of recommend to you, is the process of, like these self-expressions. So like I'll give you kind of a weird example. Like I taught high school for a year since the book came out. Like I just kind of pressed pause on my legal career or whatever and taught high school, not like full time, I guess, whatever. But it was interesting because at the time I was like, this is totally stupid, like it doesn't seem to be anything that I would want to do or enjoy. And it was really kind of hard and stupid because the classes that I had to teach were all like the lower kind of classes with people who did not care. Let's just say, did not care. Like they were kind of filler classes, is like a good way to put it. For the most part, I had like one class that I was like interested in, engaged in teaching or something. But like my intuition told me to teach the high school for a year. And it I just think it's good to, when you're thinking about like all these chess moves, you can only think about what you can think about. You know, you can only be the person that you're going to be in that moment. So you can't predict everything. But if you come, instead of like always being outcome oriented, if you come from a process, you could end up in a place that you never even knew about, that you couldn't have orchestrated to if you tried, you know, because you were just unaware that that was a possibility. And I think that that is kind of like a sanity saver for people like us, especially when you're in that stage in which like a lot of your decision making is still centered around orchestrating.
Yeah. And I'm getting to like, again, going back to like the whole values thing. I used to be one of those people who would, you know, again with the go 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 type personality and just getting shit done. I used to take on so many projects and just I was very much a yes person because I was like, give me all the opportunities, you know, whatever. But it ended up taking away from my family, and which ended up kind of screwing me because obviously going through divorce and everything. So I had to go back and like ask myself, you know, okay, what is it that like just because you can do it doesn't mean you should. You know, that was a good lesson to learn. But then also putting my energy and my abilities towards things that actually do rejuvenate me, like you were saying, that's been my focus for the past couple of years. And then COVID hit, and so a lot of things got put on hold. But you know, especially like within the Native community and stuff, that's a huge passion of mine. Making sure that like our minority community gets the recognition that it deserves, especially as sovereign nations. And then also, you know, psychology has been something that, you know, I've become more passionate about, and helping people overcome the struggles that they have in their life, because the beauty of having a more non-neurotypical mindset is that you can see things that most people can't.
Right.
And so being able to help, you know, in areas like that, like I've got a friend who's got 2 children that have extremely high psychopathic tendencies that I'm already seeing, you know, and she's so overwhelmed, and, you know, it sometimes breaks her, you know, just to deal with their kids, and she just doesn't know what to do, and they don't have the healthiest relationship. But I enjoy her children, and that's kind of why I started writing, was because I wanted to get my experience out there and maybe help others that have children that are more difficult. Because it's like whenever you have a kid like that, you know, you have like one of 2 options: either you beat it out of them, which isn't going to work, or you just give up. And when you give up and they, you know, have full reign and complete freedom, you know, you've created a monster that is going to be very difficult to ever, you know, get back into a sense of control or boundaries, you know. And that's kind of how I was brought up. I was given ultimate freedom, and my parents gave up, and they were like, nope, do whatever the hell you want.
Right.
And it caused so many issues. But as far as like the whole, you know, going more process based, I don't know what that looks like, because just my default is to just go and get stuff done.
Yeah, I have a tool for you, and it again comes from my therapist. And so I would suggest, I mean, just starting super small. Like, don't think of it as like real quick aside. When I spoke to my therapist for the first few months, I was like, it does not seem we are doing anything. You know, like I show up, we seem to small talk for forever, and then I leave. You know, and then I realized that my therapist understood that I was so outcome oriented that if I knew what his goal kind of was, what he was trying to do in the therapy, I would just jump right to the chase, you know, cut to the end and be like, yep, and now I'm done it. And now I've made this realization, you know, let's keep moving on, because I'm so kind of goal process oriented, get crap done personality. So he was intentionally misdirecting me with this small talk, and just kind of like inserting small things and trying to make me do like my own kind of work. So I don't think that it's a good idea to just like try to jump to be process oriented. I think that itself is like a process.
It's a process to become process oriented. And if you think about it this way too, it sounds a lot like your therapist was forcing you to be in the here and now as well, because it sounds like, especially with being outcome oriented, you're thinking predominantly about past and future.
100%. Yep.
Exactly. So yeah, this is interesting. I've never considered, you know, this aspect of it. So thank you for enlightening me.
No problem. So the tool that he gave me, and again, it's very in the moment tool. So this probably, maybe might appeal to you, is when you're thinking about a small decision. So again, take the decision of like, where should I go to lunch today? I'm going with some friends, what should I recommend or whatever? Often like what pretty much 96% of the time, what I would think about is like, oh, my friend so-and-so is vegan, or my friend so and so doesn't like this, or my friend this, or that I want to wow them with this. So it was still very outcome oriented. It was like, if what what choices can I make and what effect will it have on my friends, right? That was kind of the thing that I would be largely concerned about. And so his tool is to take a decision like this, and then now imagine that you are the only person in the world. There's nobody that your choice could affect. You're not going out with friends. It's just like, it's just you or whatever. And then make the choice from that place of complete, I guess almost like, self-centeredness, egotism. And interestingly, though, in making that the choice that way, you are forced to be process oriented, and you will start to realize you do have preferences that you may not have recognized before, just kind of like emotions. You may start, to notice that things that you kind of weren't aware of before, you might become aware of. And then once you know those things, that's kind of how you like build that kind of sense of process. You practice on the little things, and then you might get a clearer vision of what your preferences are, and then be able to practice kind of being process oriented on, increasingly bigger things. But, it really is like, I don't know, like 5-6 year kind of process. And so like no pressure on it, but I think it will help relieve a little bit of the pressure in your head. If there's ever times when it feels like, like you're anxious. I don't know if you experience that, but often when you're so focused on orchestrating, you're so outcome oriented, it can actually cause eventually anxiety in psychopaths, where they're so focused on like all of the future things that could happen, that like they almost start to worry, but it's not really a worry. It's more just like, like you can't really get your mind off those forward thinking thoughts. You can't really be in the moment, or you're not as well practiced about it. So I think it's good to kind of have balance always. Some people are like too in the moment, and should probably think a little bit more in 4D. And I think sometimes like our tendency is to go the other way, speaking of kind of epigenetic DNA tendencies.
Well, it's interesting because I feel like because I haven't done really much therapy. I have done some, but not much, maybe just because I can't find anybody who I would be willing to listen to. But I kind of feel like I found a better blend between being both process oriented and goal oriented. It's like whenever I make that decision to go to lunch, I want to maximize my time, by being considerate of friends or whomever. But also, I'm very, adamant about like what my preferences are. So it's like I'm going to find the right balance between both what I prefer, but also what maximizes my time and energy towards efficiency. Like if I can kill two birds with one stone, let's say that, I want to go eat at this restaurant, and it also benefits me to go there because I've got some network connections that I can talk to at the restaurant.
Mm-hmm.
It's like that's going to be the choice I'm going to make because, I both get what I want, but also I get to continue building my network.
Mm-hmm. So here's kind of one thing. I mean, my family comes to me almost like a power broker, right? Like this is kind of what I think I'm reading into. Maybe it's not what you're saying, but like, like if they have a conflict or they want something, like we all have to come together on something, like how can it get resolved? Like we're all going on a vacation, and I'm like the one who's responsible for like procuring rental cars, because it's like a place that rental cars are particularly tricky to find, right? So like I mean power broker in kind of like not this like lofty way, but just like resolving things. Like they rely on me to like try to come up with the most efficient plan. Like let's have the best day at Disneyland. Let's do the best of whatever is happening. Let's have the best rental car, right? And it kind of like tickles my brain. Like I know that still is self-expression, but I also kind of understand that is very outcome oriented. And for me, like, it's better for me to step away from that outcome orientation here and there and just be myself and just say, without even thinking about how it would affect somebody else, like, my preference is Chick-fil-A for lunch, because that really is my preference, and then in just kind of asserting myself in these small ways. Like, I even told, like, I have another acquaintance of mine who also has a weak sense of self. And I suggested, when you see something online like Twitter or Facebook, you can just say, I don't agree with the death penalty. You can just say that. And like, as you kind of like build up like this kind of asserting yourself without, and I talk to sometimes the psychopaths and they're like, well, who cares, whether you believe in the death penalty, or who cares, like, you're not going to convince anybody, or like, what's the point of doing these things?
Ooh,
Hmm?
I'm the opposite, because I've always been assertive and always been dominant in that. And that's kind of where I've gotten into trouble, because, no one's going to change my mind on something unless they present a damn good argument.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like, whenever I do see things that are arguments that are just bad, or, whenever I'm in a social situation and somebody says something that's kind of stupid or off, I call it out immediately. And that's kind of where, at least for like the identity portion of things, I've consistently been an assertive person my entire life. And it's, for me, becoming less assertive has been more helpful.
So I would suggest that rather than, because if you are an assertive person, you still want to be assertive, right? That would be like you don't want to distort your identity in any particular way. But can I give you another recommendation?
Sure.
So I would recommend that, maybe the way I explain it is enough, or maybe you could like get like a little book, especially on like the books that explain it like at the childlike level are kind of like the best, because stuff that would be explaining it to an adult like level does not really apply to us the same way that child ones. But a book on like boundaries and like teaching children boundaries, because I think people have, like, this is not a psychopath thing. Like, yes, we have bad boundaries, but so does like 90% of the population. Like, it's amazing how bad people's personal boundaries are.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And like boundaries for me, before 29, somebody would put up a boundary and I'd be like, oh, is that a challenge?
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, no, it's not a challenge, dumbass. Like, these are boundaries that people put up for a reason, but some people abuse boundary systems too.
Well, I'm curious. Go ahead. Tell me how they abuse them, because I probably agree that they call some things boundaries that are not technically boundaries. Go ahead.
It's when like people do it all the time in relationships where they're like, respect my boundary. And it's like, well, do you really want me to respect that boundary, or are you just trying to bait me? Because like basically me, but here I'm gonna put up this wall. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So let me kind of explain to you my understanding of boundaries. I think it will help. Boundaries are like a really good boundary. And we have these on the Discord terms and conditions, right? A really good boundary is that you should not tell somebody about themselves, right? Never, without their consent. That is a realm for them. So you should never characterize them in any way. And a lot of people are like, that's stupid, because what if I'm like giving them a compliment? And I think, well, what is your compliment is not necessarily somebody else, what somebody wants to hear about themselves for whatever reason. Like, that rule applies no matter what. Often there's like an implicit consent there, because, like, if you think, oh, this person likes to hear, hey, you look good in that outfit or whatever, there's an implied consent. But if you're ever unsure, then you should always ask, hey, is it okay for me to tell you something that I think is a compliment? Hey, is it okay? And maybe you've noticed me saying this to you during this whole thing. Is it okay for me to tell you something that I think is a 4 out of 10 criticism, or 3 out of 10 sensitive, or whatever? Before you say anything about somebody else, you have to get their consent. Right. So that is a 100% boundary. I know some people push back on me on it, but it will improve your relationships like dramatically if you're not already doing it. And I would encourage that you enforce that boundary against other people. Say, hey, you cannot characterize me. You can't say things about me without my consent.
That's a little bit more difficult because, yeah, that's a unique boundary to have, and I do
It's
like it.
actually not unique though. It is
Like,
actually good boundaries. And you'll read, I mean, think about it, bullying, all these things, name calling, like what are these things? They are just a violation of this boundary. Like start, maybe just think about that one and like keep it in your head, you know, be
yeah,
like, oh yeah, does it bother me when people tell me about myself when I haven't given my consent?
I feel like for me that it doesn't, but like
Mhm.
also, I don't know. I have, like for the most part, like one of the boundaries that I'll use with other people is like if I'm going through something and I need to kind of discuss and talk things out, I'll ask them, hey, are you in a good headspace to talk with me right now before I just come and dump on you?
Yeah.
So that kind of reminds me a little bit of that, but like just how I am and who I am. Um, I think that boundary would be a little bit more difficult for me to apply like on a larger scale
Uh-huh.
because some just don't give a shit about. And I'm like, I'm going to tell you how it is. And I'm going to tell you how your behavior is impacting,
No,
the
wrong.
situation. And see, but
That's
that's kind of
bad
part of,
boundaries.
yeah, but that's on brand for me. Like, and that's authentic to me, if that makes sense.
Yes. Okay. So, but here's kind of the thing though. Like somebody else, you have the right to define for yourself your own reality, right? Somebody else has the right to define for themselves their own reality. You can assert yourself, but your assertiveness stops at your own, like you're characterizing your own self. You can always make I statements. You can always say, I feel, upset, or I feel, cheated, or I feel whatever it is, but you cannot characterize their behavior and say like you cheated me, you provoked me, right? Because that is a characterization of them, right? So it's okay to kind of assert your own self, but it can't be an assertion about somebody else. You're, asserting yourself does not include asserting something about them, another person. You see what I mean?
I get what you're saying.
Uh-huh.
Something that is, I don't know if I'm capable of that because of how.
So again, it's like this small little thing. Like you can just try to, you can always say the things. You know how often people say yes when you say, can I say something that's critical of you? They will say yes because they want to know. So that's the main change, is that you
So,
just get their consent.
so you manipulate them into consent because people are curious.
No, you don't manipulate them. They actually do give their consent because most people do want to know. They do want to know.
Yeah,
That is
they
like
do.
they're honest. You're not manipulating them into wanting to know. They do want to know.
Mm, I agree there, and I'm sorry. I'm like playing in my head right now some situations that I've been in recently where I've had people come up to me just to engage and stuff, and then it just gets to a point where it's like I've had to tell them off because I'm like, look, you encroached on my space and my company and wanted this conversation, and it's completely like gone downhill, and now
So
you're trying to tell me that I'm angry. I'm like,
yes,
no.
but enforcing this boundary will keep that from happening early, because when they start encroaching on your space, that's your boundary. You enforce it and you say the conversation is over. Like if you
Oh yeah.
cannot respect my boundary, the
Yep.
conversation's over. Like how often will this blow up in the beginning? Often. How often will it blow up later? I mean, if it's blowing up later, then these are people that, I mean, if people can't respect your boundaries, then why are you associating with them? Some of them you do have to, but eventually you'll be able to disassociate yourself with them. Again, it's a process or whatever, but like rather than kind of being like tit for tat, quid pro quo, like you violated my boundary, now I'm going to tell you what's up with you. Right? Like
Mhm.
that's the alternative.
Yeah. So
And
it's I'm playing with it in my head and
yeah,
kind of
try
figure
it
out.
out. I never say, like take my word for it. I say, just try it out. See if you like it better.
Huh, okay, yeah, I'll give it a shot. I'll
Yeah.
play with it.
So
How
the
see the
second
outcome.
boundary, yes, is super related to the first. These are just like the best ones that most people get wrong. And, they're quick and dirty. Like if you get just these two right, then you will have better boundaries than like the majority of the population, is like my belief. The second one is do not tell others what to do.
I agree with that one.
Yeah. Yeah. And you probably are more sensitive to this than others. This is just my guess, because there's something that a lot of psychopaths experience, which is called, somebody else named it, gray rage. And Arya, my girlfriend, says it's when somebody has a false sense of their own authority over her, and then consequently a false sense of their own safety because of her, right? So when somebody tells her what to do in a situation like, hey, you can't smoke within like 10 feet of this door, and it's just some random person or whatever, or you can't sit there in the airport because that's for like, you know, disabled people, you know, that's
Like,
most likely to trigger it. Like, and if you ever have read my book, the gray rage incident I can think of right away is I was walking down disabled escalators, right? And then some like a janitor person in the subway system in Washington, D.C. was like, hey, you're not supposed to be on the thing. And it's like, fine. But he was like, didn't you see the sign? Like, he kept following up, you know?
yeah,
And so he had a false sense of his own authority over me in that situation. So yeah, that is a boundary. Do not tell other people what to do. What can we do? You
to that
agree?
one.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was sensitive to that one. And but to like nobody, for the most part, no one in my community really tells me what to do.
Mm-hmm.
Because,
even online, if somebody's like, you know, like delete your tweet or something, that's one that I see frequently where I'm like, no, it is wrong to tell somebody what to do. What can you do instead? You can invite them, you can persuade them, you can, you know, you can give them reasons like, hey, I would invite you to consider this, you know, or like, hey, you know, your tweet seems, you know, it's fine to characterize things like their actions, like, or their tweet, you know, their tweet seems to, you know, equate like the Holocaust with, you know, whatever veganism in a way that's inaccurate, you know. It's fine
yeah,
to do that because you're not telling them they're a liar or they're a terrible person. It's not telling them to delete their person. Like, you may want to consider, you know, that not all people who are vegan are Holocaust survivors or vice versa, and that maybe there's less of a connection there, and that some people might even find it offensive that you say this about them or whatever, right? Rather than delete your tweet, you know, it actually makes more work for you because you have to kind of tell them like, what are the reasons why you think that this behavior is either not helpful to you or not helpful to them. So those are the basic boundary ones. But the other general rule, we do have to kind of wrap up. I have to take off pretty soon. The other general rule about boundaries is anything that involves somebody else's behavior is not a boundary unless their behavior is directly affecting you, right?
yes.
So like, it, you know, you're offended that somebody tweeted something, you cannot police their behavior, right? Because that's not directly affecting you. Like, I'm thinking more like they have, and basically it comes back to the first two rules. Like, you can only tell them, hey, you can't characterize me and you can't tell me what to do. That's basically all that you can say to somebody, you know, in terms of telling them they can't, right? Everything else, they have free agency. They can do whatever they want, right? It's a violation of their agency to try to tell somebody, you know, like, hey, I'm offended by this, or you have to do this or whatever.
Yeah, you to resolve.
Yeah, you can use the court system, you know, like let's say the court system says, for instance, what's a good example? You have to pay taxes, right? Court system, or it says somebody has to pay somebody else child support, right? Court system can then, and then all you're doing is enforcing a judgment, but you cannot enforce standards of behavior on another person, not ever, right? Unless it's, you know, it's like through a court system, like you can try to enforce it that way.
The only way that you can, well, there's another way to enforce it too, though, because one of the things that I've been working on with my my kids is the law of attention. You know, you take away attention as almost like a not really a punishment, but as a consequence to bad behavior. You know, so like that's one way of enforcing it, because you know, the person with the bad behavior either has two options: either they adjust and conform to acceptable behavior, or they continue to devolve and continue to be pushed out.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's where I've seen, at least at a social level, applications of consequences for, you know, poor behavior. And one of the things, like within my friend group, I'm so fortunate to have a really strong friend group of, you know, just awesome people, because like when anybody kind of like messes up, you know, we come in and we hold them accountable, you know, and we don't tell them that what they're like, how do I put it? Like, we're not sitting there shitting on them and saying, you know, like, oh, you're such a bad person. We're just saying probably wasn't the best thing to do, kind of like you were talking about, like explain.
As long as it's an I statement, it's okay. Otherwise, holding people accountable seems to violate their boundaries, just to me, you know, because it's like, who are you, the thought police or the police of their behavior, or what? Like, what role do you have in their life that would like allow you sort of like a parenting type relationship?
Where the role comes into play, though, because like within our friend group, you know, we're all very success driven, and we all have like our own prominence within our like respective fields. And so somebody slips up, you know, it kind of is a reflection on the group.
Yeah, can't. That's bad boundaries. I mean, you can get their consent and say, hey, do you consent to me, like whatever this? But yeah, I can see how this is going to be tricky for you.
Well, this friend group, though, it is consensual, because like all of us
make sure that they actually, I would give you that advice. I would say like the best way to make sure that there's consent is to actually ask, hey, do you consent to me saying this thing? And if it is consensual, they'll say yes. You know, that's the easy part of it.
Yeah, so it's really interesting, and I'll probably go and take these boundaries back to the group and be like, hey, here's some stuff to consider, and just so we're all on the page, do we all consent to accountability? Which, you know, we talk about accountability a lot within our group and stuff, because some of us just do the stupidest shit.
Yeah,
and we're I need you guys, you know, like I've given my consent where I'm like, hey, if I overstep or something like that, if I slip up, you know, please hold me accountable.
Yeah,
you know, because I'm tired. You know, if we're all very like growth oriented, and so that's where that comes up into play. But again, you know, I've seen like within, just because we're a part of like a very large network, and so when people, you know, maybe in like an orbit of our network, you know, fuck up or something, or do something to like harm someone within our group, you just take attention away. That's it. We just don't associate with that person anymore, because we can't control their behavior, but we can control ours. And so what we do is collectively, we just we remove ourselves from the situation.
Yes, that is the best way to enforce your boundaries, you know, other than like using legal means or whatever, is just with your feet. You know, if they can't comply, then you just like, you can always take yourself out of the situation and take yourself away from associating with them.
Yeah, that's like that's the hardest thing to do, especially like with the situation that I told you about with my mother. You know,
yeah, because there is that connection, and it is going to be harder to like, you know, like somebody your barista or whatever violates a boundary of yours. It's easier to walk away, right? With somebody like your mother that you have like these ties to for whatever reason, that's more difficult. But you know, that is still the only thing. You can't try to control her behavior. You can't tell her about herself. You can only tell her about, you know, your own feelings, and she can choose to do whatever she wants, and then you can only react to that. Here's like a last one, and then I really have to go. The third thing is, you can't give people ultimatums. If anything, it's just like because people have like an infinite number of choices. You can't limit it down to 2 or whatever, and then tell them these are going to be the consequences. I mean, these boundaries don't apply as much for children, but they are actually really great for children too. Children do appreciate this. And if you teach them these boundaries early on, they'll have these boundaries in their relationships later on as adults. And you can trust them to be in good, healthy relationships, because they will know and understand these boundaries because you've taught them since they were little.
I'll work on that with my kids.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I won't eat up any more of your time. I know you got a schedule.
It's been such a pleasure talking with you. We've talked about so many things. I almost feel like we've talked about more things than any other Zoom I've been on, like bam, 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 bam. So I appreciate you. I appreciate your thinking about things. I appreciate your perspective, sharing them. And I appreciate that, I should say this, I appreciate that we're not all the same, even though there are similarities. And what works for me is not necessarily going to work for you. These are just all invitations of things to consider and try out. And it's not at all because I want you to not be yourself. I want you to be exactly yourself. And I'm just hoping that these things will help you to be more consistently yourself in all the ways that will lead to like a great feeling of life satisfaction, fulfillment, and great healthy relationships.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
No problem. Maybe we'll catch up with you in a couple months. You can like come back and say, you know, if you did try any of these things, you can say, hey, I tried them and, you know, I did or didn't like them because of this. That'd be interesting.
Yeah, I'll let you know how it plays out.
Okay, sounds good. Have a good day.
You too.